Hi, welcome to Tell Me How You're Mighty, the podcast about surviving infidelity and other hard stuff. I'm Tracy Shorn, your host with Sarah Gorel, and we have a guest today, Paul Doncaster, and we'll bring him in a second. And the theme today is telling people your story, telling people your chump story, if that's your challenge. And we're just going to jump right in with talking about difficult subjects and how they are received. And Sarah has been out there, and I've definitely been out there for 11 years talking about the most mortifying, humiliating thing that ever happened to me. So before we bring Paul on, Sarah, how does it feel to now be on a podcast telling the worst thing that ever happened to you? Do you get any feedback or?
What I find interesting is that when you find out your partner's had an affair, the advice is often don't tell anyone, you'll undermine the marriage in some way. So you don't tell anyone. And behind closed doors, you put up with dysfunction that you wouldn't do in any other circumstance. No one would say if you were subject to domestic abuse, oh, don't tell anyone that they're hitting you. You know, that might undermine the marriage. But if they're cheating on you and deceiving you and undermining you, and I think by telling people, you hear how common these stories are and how similar these stories are. You know, last guest, I just related to everything she said, talking about the dysfunction and the lying and the cheating and the mental breakdown and the blame shifting. And the more you talk about it, the more that you realize that there is a common theme among all this behavior.
Yes, and it breaks the spell, doesn't it? I mean, then you realize, oh, I am not freak of the week. You know, and this person doesn't have superpowers. They're just ordinary and manipulative and awful. And that's just a very hard truth to wrap your mind around. But I think telling our stories frees us. You know, you're not alone, you're not isolated, and you realize how common the stories are.
We live in a world where we're encouraged to talk about things, where there should be no taboos. We talk about almost anything.
Yeah.
And yet still, it seems that your partner having an affair is still one of those areas where you're told, oh, no, don't tell anyone. It's gonna upset him or her. It's going to make things worse. It's going to undermine your marriage, you know, just between yourself and the counselor.
Right. Or I mean, I don't know if it's worse, but I think the other reason people don't tell is because you will be blamed for this terrible thing that happened to you. And I really think it's the last taboo. And I think it's another reason why people should tell their stories so we can stop the victim blaming. But if you say, I've been cheated on, I guess if you're a man, they can go, you're a cuck, which is the latest slur du jour. For women, it's, oh, you're sexless, you're withholding, you spend too much time with the children, you didn't lose the baby weight. I mean, whatever it is, you emasculated him, you earn more. I mean, you can come up with, you stayed home with the kids, whatever it is, it's somehow your fault for this thing that you didn't even know was happening. You drove them to it. And I think that's another reason people are quiet, is they don't want to be judged in this really harsh way.
The other thing is, if you don't tell people, you don't get the full story. So, you know, when I started to tell people about what had happened, other instances came out. People said, oh, yes, he did this and he did that. And I found that there were other evidence of disgraceful, scurrilous goings on that I would never have known about had I not decided to be open with what was going on. I thought this was a one-off, and clearly it wasn't.
Right. And then that's also part of the power game, right? You know, not only is he doing these things, I bet he had his own narrative out there about, you know, why he had to do it. You know, Sarah doesn't understand me. Sarah's busy with the children, whatever. I mean, that's the part too, is that people who behave this disorderly are probably out there with their own character assassination and their narrative first. And part of the reason of keeping you quiet is to keep their narrative prominent, right? You don't want anyone to compare notes or stories, find out it's a load of stuff. So you're usually isolated in a lot of different ways.
I'm very excited to hear our guest and his story today, because you've told me the full story, Tracy, and this takes it to a whole new level.
It's a whole new level of mightiness here.
Almost unbelievable, isn't it?
Yes. So Paul Doncaster not only told his story about being chumped, but he did it publicly for a Moth Radio hour in front of a live audience. And I'm not going to steal his thunder. I will let him tell what happened. But Paul, welcome to Tell Me How You're Mighty. And please tell us how you're mighty. Tell us about your story and telling people.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And as you two were speaking, it was like so much of this was bringing me back to the troubles, as I've called them, and I've heard you call them as well, Tracy. I won't go too deep into my backstory. I've said it enough on various blog postings that you've done. And if anybody wants to hear the real ugly story, which it's pretty interesting, it's pretty out there. You can grab me at Chumpapalooza if anybody on here is going to be there. In keeping with the theme of what we're talking about, though, I realized pretty early on that I needed to speak to somebody, anybody. I wasn't comfortable telling my parents or my sisters. I don't have a really big social circle. Work was an inappropriate place to do it. But when I realized I was in a place that I did not sign up for, I knew there was one person I could reach out to, and I hadn't spoken to her for 10 years. She was somebody I knew in college. She was engaged to a fraternity brother of mine. And 2 years into that marriage, he apparently, I don't think she was chumped in that instance, but apparently woke her up one morning when she was, I think, 3 or 4 months pregnant and said, I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore, and left her. So I became even more close to her during that ordeal. And this was when I was living in another state. And when I moved back here, she ended up marrying somebody else. And turns out she was married to a guy who did not think it was appropriate for women to have friendships with men, even if they, predated them. She's the first name I thought of. And so I reached out to her. And after 10 years, she picked up the phone and we started talking. Come to find out, this other guy that she married walked her daughter down the aisle at their wedding, not 3 months prior to my call, and then was caught with somebody in a hotel room. Had been going on for a while. So double jeopardy
chump
for her. So she, unfortunately and fortunately for me, was in a fantastic position to sort of be my spirit guide through this, horrific thing I was going through. I was very fortunate. She was really skillful in how she guided me. She didn't judge. She let me talk out and ask questions and got me to the conclusion I needed to get to on my own. When I know she would tell you, she probably wanted to jump through the phone at various parts and wrap her hands around my throat and say, Paul, wake up. She's,
Yeah.
This is not healthy.
Don't do all the chump rookie mistakes.
Exactly.
So you went from crisis telling. There was a trajectory of just finding out and having to talk about it before you could talk about it publicly.
Exactly. And I credit her to that. I credit her for turning me onto the Chump Lady site as well, because she's the one who told me about it. And that sort of led to me finding the, I don't want to call it bravery. I don't really consider it bravery myself. I know other people may think it's that way, but it's very therapeutic for me personally to have taken the route that I did.
Tell us how you did this. So were you involved in storytelling before this happened? No,
but I have a younger sister who was very active in the local live performance, improv, things like that. And I had seen her do Moth style storytelling on stage before. And I remember I was in the audience and I remember thinking, I can do that. I mean, it's I don't sing, I don't dance, I don't juggle, I don't have any of those traditional talents, but I can do this. But I put it away. I didn't even think about it again until the trouble started. And then I just needed to get out of the house. I was in the house with my fuckwit for another 10 months after I said enough, which is a whole other topic, I'm sure. But I needed to find a way back out into the world again. And I saw an ad for a local, not Moth, but local storytelling event at a small library close by. So I got out and I went over to that and I told about something completely different and got some good feedback. And so it sort of just took off from there. And it wasn't until maybe 3 or 4 months in that I decided to tell my story called The Stranger, which I'll plan on telling in November for the benefit of everybody else. It's how I bagged, I bagged the both of them. I confronted the both of them in my driveway.
This is your D-Day story.
Yeah, well, kind of, sort of, yeah.
Kind of, sort of, yeah.
Did that make you feel vulnerable telling that whole story in front of so many people? Because this is, these are some of the most traumatic moments of our lives, and then sharing it with an audience. I think that's staggeringly brave.
Yeah, I agree.
Therapeutic. Again, that's all I mean, the only thing I can say is the more I told it, the better I felt. And I started with people close to me. I started with my friend in there, and Then that led to my sisters and my parents, and by extension, my cousins. And then I got to the point where I was telling, I mean, probably people sick of hearing it, but I got to the point where I was like, I'll tell anybody if they want to hear it. And it's so out there. The things that happened are just so out there that, jaws were dropped and eyebrows went up. And as I said, it was very, very healing for me to be, the more I told it, the better I felt.
I mean, isn't that the thing? I mean, when you tell people who have compassion, ordinary people with hearts, what happened, for them to react that, oh my God, this is transgressive, it is a big reality check. It is such validation when you've been in the mindfuck blender and you think all this manipulation, whatever, is normal, or you're so caught up in it. It really is powerful to have people react, oh my God, I'm so sorry that happened to you.
The other thing I'm thinking, listening to you, Paul, is obviously you went through this for over a long period of time, sort of all the shenanigans and the trying to save things, and and you almost end up thinking that this behavior yourself is normal, when if you were someone looking in, you would immediately think it was wrong, but somehow you get embroiled. And I'd be asking people whether some of the most ridiculous and bizarre behavior was in some way something I could control or I could sort out. I could do. It's only when you start talking to people that you realize, no, this isn't normal. This is not right. And you need to get yourself away from this situation.
Yeah, and on the flip side, there are also people who I spoke with who didn't try to normalize it necessarily, but I mean, we've all been there. People will not make, they'll make excuses, or they'll say, yeah, I know somebody who sort of did this and they handled it this way. But then you start seeing that advice for exactly what it is, which is, I don't want to think about difficult things, because what does that mean for, I can't imagine that happening for me. So let's just put it off to the side, or the Switzerland friends, or everything like that. So you not only get the love and you get the appreciation, which you take with you and empowers you, but you also start being able to better identify the behaviors that are counter to that. And whether you can just leave them alone, right? Okay, say thank you very much and move along and don't have much to do with them anymore, or accept that you make a decision for yourself. Is this somebody I want to keep in my life, or is this, and deal with it knowing that it's there, or do I cut them out?
Well, take me back to the stranger. So you are in your driveway and you are going to tell the story blow by blow, what happened to you.
We talk about unbelievable behavior behind closed doors, but unbelievable behavior in the audacity of this story, I still struggle. Just tell us exactly what happened, Paul.
As Tracy knows very well, sometimes when a breakup happens with a person like this, miraculously, they start doing things that you're doing, or showing up at places that you show up. And about a month and a half after I started doing this, lo and behold, there is my ex and her new fella telling stories on stage, showing up at the same events in the audience. And if it's one where you pick names out of a hat, they put their names in, and sometimes they show up. And it's like, God damn, I can't do anything. I finally got something that I can wrap my mind around. I can become part of a community. I'm starting to make some acquaintances, and there she is, right? So
you can't have nice things.
I can't have nice things. Exactly. So I finally accepted that was part of the bargain. And I started avoiding the ones that I knew she would be at that were smaller, and concentrated on the larger ones. But there was one series in the Boston area where we both won an event, which led us to both be part of the grand, sort of the finals, if you want to call it that. And the story that got me there was the stranger story. And so I show up with 10 people, most of them relatives, but a couple people I actually met through the Chump Lady site, which was awesome. And she showed up with maybe 4 people. And I had to tell the driveway story. So I, just for the random order of how the show went, I ended up telling maybe 3rd or 4th on a program of 10. And she told probably 7th or 8th. And I got great reaction to mine. And then she got up. She's sitting there with her new guy, hearing about how I caught her.
He must have been so proud of his lovely.
Oh,
he must have been pleased to hear what a joy she was.
Well, it makes you wonder. I don't spend too much time on it, but it makes you wonder how much he does know, right? I'm sure he doesn't know an awful lot. Not my problem. But then she got up and hers, I don't want to speak out of turn, right? We'll let her story be hers. But suffice to say, it was about the first time the two of them met. And it was not a regular date. Let's put it that way. It wasn't so dinner and a movie. It was something else. And people were walking out afterward. Neither one of us won, but people were
I love
walking
that people
out of
walk
it
out.
going with this look on their face going, how do you say that? How do you say that in public? I mean, none of them knew that I was there and who I was, but just how do you tell that story in public?
Well, following up on your story, you got there first. But what an intimidation factor. I mean, it does seem kind of intimidating to kind of get you to not tell your story by her being the proverbial turd in the punch bowl and showing up.
Again, it was not a concern at that point. I had reached a point where I was just so over it. I wasn't mad necessarily because you take all that stuff with you in various ways for a while afterward, but I was just so over it and felt so good about where I was that it didn't matter if she was there. I mean, she knew what happened.
Could you see her face as you told the story and see how she was reacting to it? That must have been quite a surreal experience.
It was no expression, kind of like the screaming matches when I caught her, and just sort of dead expression. Didn't look at him. I would be curious to go back in time and get a look at what his face looked like. It was fine. It was perfectly fine. And I know that may be weird for people to hear and difficult to imagine, but it really was something that I'm glad I did.
And how was it received?
Very well. Very well.
Yeah.
I mean, very well by those who get it, right? Inevitably, when I tell a story, people come up to you and say, you did a great job. You did a great job. When I tell this particular story, I get a few, I've been there. I get it. I totally get it. And people don't want to dwell on it because of all the obvious reasons.
Yeah, but it probably really helps to have you out there. I'm sure it probably helped a lot of the people who came up who said, I've been there. I'm sure they're tipping their hat going, wow, that took guts.
Yeah. I'd like to think so. That's my pay it forward. I mean, that's part of my pay it forward.
It sounds though that she needs you in her relationships. She needs you in her life in some way because she's been busy tracking you down. So far from sort of trotting off and skipping into the future and having a joyful life, she's been deliberately trying to get involved in areas of your life, which is just the most peculiar behavior.
No, it makes all the sense in the world to me. And it might be just because of who she is and who I am. But as Tracy also knows, and a lot of Chump Nation knows, they rely on us a lot of time to give them meaning, right? They find meaning in the way they mirror the person that's closest to them, or they find somebody, my experience anyway, they find somebody who they want to emulate or who they think will bring them to the place that will give them some happiness, but they live through that person.
Yeah. Or they just like to triangulate, more kibbles, the better. And the best thing you can do is take yourself out of the triangle. But, if they'll just try to get attention. It's just attention seeking. And also I think a lot of them aren't that original. I found, I don't know, early days after my D-Day, I found my now ex on dating sites, and he had taken obscure singer-songwriters I liked and books I'd read and museums I enjoy, things that he had never done, would never do, did not like, and had made it his interests on his own profile. And it was either, Tracy's going to look at this, it's going to fuck her head, or he was just trying to find another chump. And he thought, oh, this is chump bait. I'll just put these things out. Or it's like, he's just not that original. And you just think, they're like little magpies. They'll just take a little something here, something there. And try to create a reality because they don't have one. They're not that deep.
I don't ask questions of my daughters. Like I follow the the mess script and just, let them live their life when they're with her and I live mine with them. But I can't help, I can't help that they bring up things from time to time in front of me. And I'm not amazed and amazed at the same time that some of the very things I was chastised for liking or made fun of for liking when we were together are now things she I don't want to say embraces, but apparently her new guy likes those very things, or likes, whatever, because this is for the very thing I used to be made fun of for liking is now something that's embraced.
Yeah. Sarah, have you had any of this, or yours just stays away?
He does listen to me on the radio, which I find quite surreal. So my daughter, he sees very little of my children, but my daughter says she finds it very odd that he talks with great fondness about things from the past, and also quite often she'll get in the car and there will be me booming out the radio, which I just find
Oh my God.
really weird, and it must be very weird for his who is now wife to be subjected to this as well. I just sometimes wonder, do they enjoy being talked about, even if it's a negative way? I'm wondering what your ex will have felt, Paul. She must have felt very special and important that you were there telling your story, and she will have felt central to that. And I wonder whether talking about them makes them feel as if they are some big special being.
Any attention is good attention, right? It's an old adage. Any publicity is good publicity. Tracy talks about this an awful lot in the book, where centrality is the order of the day, whether it's good or bad. And some people, I'll never understand it, but some people just, as long as they're central, they're being talked about, it gives them validation as human beings, I guess. Yeah. Tracy, you would probably comment on this better than me.
I think the caveat to that is ridicule. I think if you're narcissistically inclined, you do not like to be ridiculed. And I think that is also the power of telling your story, or to find the deep veins of absurdist humor, because I think whenever we talk about infidelity, it's just, you got to have a sense of gallows humor, because it's just so pompous and ridiculous. And the best kind of humor is taking pot shots at the big inflated ego, right? And if you're the person with the big inflated ego, you do not want to be taken down. You know that you're being ridiculed. And I don't think they enjoyed that kind of attention. And, thus stay quiet. Don't tell anybody about your story. Don't be a bitter bunny. All of the ways to tell people not to do that. But I think if you're, for purposes of entertainment, I mean, you're doing this for Moth Radio Hour, and purposes of taking your words back, absolutely tell your story. It's yours to tell. It's also yours to not share if you don't want to. Nobody can make you tell about traumatic things in your life, but that it's your story and you don't have to play nice. You don't have to.
My ex-husband used to take great delight in sort of showing me little moments of his new relationship with his now wife. And one of them, when he came back, and he'd had something mysterious tattooed up his arm, and it was all in Cornish. And so he showed me this tattoo, and he said, "You won't know what it means. It's special and it's mysterious." And I said, "Oh no, let me have a look at it, because I do know a little bit of Cornish, which actually I don't." And I looked at this tattoo, and I said, "Oh yes, yeah, I know what that says. Morally bankrupt fuckwit." And of course, I now know that whenever he looks at that tattoo, which incidentally is now going green to my satisfaction, that will stay with it. And of course, these individuals are given to righteous indignation and pomposity when you in any way undermine.
How dare you?
Being special and important with their mysterious messages on their arm and that kind of thing.
You reminded me, Sarah, of one particular call I had with my friend who was getting me through the troubles. And as I said, she was very skillful in how she handled me. But I remember one specific time when I was trying to untangle the skein of fucked upness, Tracy. And I remember saying, so it's possible that she's doing this, but it's also possible that I'm doing this. And I was going on and on. I shudder to think about what I was saying now, looking back on it. But I went on for about 10 minutes, and she listened very quietly. And then she ended it with, "Well, Paul, there is another possibility that you're leaving out." And I said, "What's that?" She said, "That she's batshit crazy and she's completely fucked up in the head." And I laughed for probably 10 minutes straight. It was just sort of that obvious that, yes, finding the humor in this is just so critical, because it is so absurd. It's part of the reason why I started doing the song parodies. It's another sort of creative outlet to get people laughing. Our stories that I read every day, I'm still on the blog every day. It's become a force of habit, but some of them are just so.
And you are the author of many a song parody, which is amazing. Yeah. You can come up with these any letter, any topic, anything. There's a song parody in your head. You're the Randy Rainbow of Chump Nation. There you go.
Well, thank you very much. Or the Weird Al. But it's just so important to find that absurdity and find a way to laugh at it, because that's a huge part of healing as well, I think.
Yeah, taking your power back. Would you like to give a plug for what you're going to do? Chumpapalooza, which is coming up in November?
Yes. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to put the word out at a future date. I'm going to hold myself to within the next maybe 3 or 4 weeks, Tracy. To anybody who's attending or anybody who's thinking about attending and hasn't made up their mind yet, on the Saturday, on the last night, we're going to have a big Moth style story hour. I'm going to curate the story. So I'm going to put out the word and have people pitch their stories. And the way it'll work is I'll sift through all of them. Maybe I'll bring you and Tracy as well to see, which ones I think would provide a good balance.
I'm a good judge of fuck up in this.
Yeah, good balance of humorous and mightiness and overcoming, all the different aspects of what we go through to come up with a program. And with those who decide that they want to participate, I'll work with them over the course of maybe the month before. I'll set up some phone hours. We'll go through sort of how I could advise on making a story arc and having the importance of having a good beginning and a good ending. And then by the time we get there, it'll be sort of a nice, tight show that everybody who's in the audience who doesn't want to actually get up on stage can enjoy.
And cheer.
Exactly. We're also going to have, and anybody who's been to a Moth Story Slam knows that there's sort of an audience participation aspect of it as well. We'll hand out little pieces of paper and have people do little 2-sentence stories based on the theme of mightiness. And I'll read those in between the actual curated stories. So everybody will have a chance to sort of contribute a little something if they feel like it.
Oh, that's great.
I suspect you're going to be wading your way through so much dysfunction to get to this point. There's going to be a sea of dysfunctional stories, aren't there, before you actually get to the point where you've edited them all down? Because that's what's astonishing, and that's what's amazing when you read Chump Lady. You sort of your jaw drops in disbelief at the antics and the shenanigans of these individuals. They think they're magnificent, but actually they're just comedy entertainment when you break it down.
Yep. And they don't have to be entertaining, right? My stranger story isn't a funny story that will leave you uplifted. It just is a story of one person overcoming the most tragic thing that ever happened to them. That's a more than worthy story. That's mighty. Exactly. So I'm hoping anybody who's thinking about going will go. I'm hoping anybody who has decided to go will definitely think about the opportunity of getting up in front of people. It's the best audience you could possibly have. If it works out the way I hope it will. Do you promise
that your ex-wife and her affair partner will not be there in the audience?
I'd be
Can you promise though? Can you promise?
Part of me would love to have them there just so they could be surrounded by the thing that is so antithesis to what they are, yeah.
We'll also have a Cornish tattoo station where we can make indecipherable tattoos on our arms. I love it. When you were telling that, Sarah, I kept thinking, I bet this man doesn't know a word of Cornish, and somebody probably just put something like 50p pasties this way, or something really stupid that he doesn't know.
So he was so pleased with himself when he said it had his mysterious words, and that's been my satisfaction. When you actually come up with the response immediately, whereas normally you think about it afterwards. That was my proudest moment.
This must be a thing, Sarah, because again, I don't ask questions, but sometimes I'm told things. Teenagers can't help themselves. Apparently, the two of them got matching math tattoos. It's some sort of equation that doesn't make any sense. It didn't make any sense to them. And when they asked her about it, her response was apparently, it's special math that only we understand.
Oh, lovely. That's lovely.
And it's both tattooed on their body someplace. I don't know.
Isn't that beautiful? They've got their special maths to keep them together. We can all aspire to that one day in a relationship.
What's with the tattoos? I think this could be a Friday challenge. I don't know. I mean, nothing wrong with tattoos, but no. I am sensing a theme here.
She had 2 when we were married. Word is from, again, my teenagers. She's all covered in all types of special little symbols and signs that mean something. I don't know. That must be a thing too. I don't get it.
You're probably there somewhere, Paul. I reckon Paul's probably there somewhere in a special symbol environment, to be honest. I bet
Probably.
she's got something symbolizing you since she's coming
Actually,
along.
okay, one last little thing. We're probably getting up to the end here, but while we were still living together in the 10 months of hell, she came home one Saturday morning with a new tattoo. I was sitting in the kitchen on my laptop, and she called the girls down from upstairs, come down and see my new tattoo. So she did it in front of me on purpose. It was a empty bird cage with the door ajar on a branch on her shoulder. And one of the girls said, "What does this mean?" And she made up something. But the message was pretty clear to me. It was no longer caged. I'm out living, being the person I was always meant to be. That was the phrase she always used. I'm gonna finally the person I was meant to be. So she was no longer in the cage of
stop
Paul.
cohabitating for 10 months. Get out of it. Be free. Be free.
Yeah, exactly.
Sadly, I think the cage was probably more appropriate for you. You're the one that was freed from that cage, not her. This is it. We get freed from them rather than the other way around when
Absolutely.
you start.
More ways than you know, Sarah.
It was making me think of, Ben Affleck famously has a Phoenix Rising tattoo on his back after divorcing, was it Jennifer Garner, the woman that he chumped for many years. But when they finally broke up, he got the Phoenix Rising tattoo. Such is his suffering.
Oh. You've definitely got your Tattoo Friday challenge. That has to be done, I think.
Okay, the Friday Tattoo Challenge. All right, maybe people will leave us a voicemail with their tattoo stories. That could be a whole episode. So to plug Chumpapalooza, which is November 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and you can check it out on the site, chumplady.com, and you can hear Paul and get his coaching if you sign up, and are selected. And thank you so much. Thank you so much. And again, if you want to leave us a message, it's chumplady.com/mighty. See you next week.